There it is, wonderful victory.
Hello and welcome to Endless Summers, an Australian Test cricket history podcast. This is part 2 of our episode covering the 1901-02 tour by England. Part 1 was released last week and covers the first 2 tests of the 5-test series. We resume with the series locked at 1-1. Another 2 weeks passed before the third test commenced in Adelaide. The English went in unchanged, whilst the Australians dropped Jones, who had only taken 1 wicket across the first 2 matches, in favour of Macleod. There was some speculation regarding Noble's place, having suffered a knee injury in the previous test, but he convinced the selectors he was the right to go. The pitch was uncharacteristically slow and low, and as such, Maclaren had little hesitation in batting first when he won the toss. Maclaren and Hayward continued in their vein of their strong partnerships from previous matches. They were cautious against the bowling of Trumbull and Macleod, but took advantage of the short square boundaries of the Adelaide Oval when the bowlers erred. Darling rotated Noble and Howe through the bowling crease for little impact as the score reached 60 after the first hour of play. Few dangers faced the batsmen in the lead up to lunch, and both managed to reach 43 as the break was taken, with English comfortable at none for 88. During the lunch break, there was much consternation over the dropping of Jones, as his pace would have provided a point of difference in the attack. Armstrong's leg breaks were tried, but Hayward twice hit him to the boundary, bringing up his own 50 and the team 100 in the process. Soon after, Armstrong succeeded in bowling Maclaren. The English captain started to walk off, but was recalled by the umpire as the bowler had overstepped. He brought up his 50 soon after as the partnership continued to build, reaching 149. Hayward drove a ball to mid-on and remained in his crease as Maclaren charged down the wicket. Maclaren turned but failed to get back in time, being run out for 67 by a good throw from Trumper. He was replaced by Tildesley, who struggled to penetrate the field. Whilst Hayward played some good strokes off Noble, Tildesley remained scoreless for 25 minutes. The pressure was too great and he lashed out at Trumbull, only to hit a high return catch to the bowler to be out for a duck. Hayward followed soon after, having reached 90, only to be run out by the wicketkeeper. Jessup followed for 1 soon after, leaving the English at 4 for 171 at the tea break. Following tea, Lilly could only manage 10 before being trapped LBW by Trumbull, giving him his 3rd wicket. This led to Quaife and Braun combining. Braun started well, finding the boundary twice, whilst Quaife was batting at his usual slow pace. The two helped take the score past 200 and from there began to accelerate. Quaife found the boundary twice off Macleod and also took Howe for 7 runs off 2 balls. For once he was a dominant member of a partnership and moved past 50 just before stumps were drawn. With Braun 35 not out, the English ended the day on 5 for 266, with honours considered even between the two sides. The two batsmen started the second day under overcast skies. This had little effect as the score moved steadily onwards towards 300. Braun was lucky to survive on 44 when Macleod missed a hot chance over his head. Quaife moved on to 68 before he managed to tickle one down the leg side off Howe, falling to 294. He was replaced by Jones, who helped take the score past 300 before he was run out going for the 3rd run needed to complete Braun's half-century. Gunn joined Braun, who completed his 50 with an off-drive for 4 off Howe. They managed to get through to lunch without further mishaps, heading for the break at 7 for 330. Braun should have been dismissed shortly after the resumption of play, but Trumbull dropped a simple chance in the slips. Braun then took full advantage, hitting a boundary to the leg side off Howe before fouling the boundary twice more in the bowler's next over. This took the score past 350. Braun continued hitting, moving into denies before losing his partner at 371, with Gunn playing a ball from Noble onto his stumps to be out for 24. With only the final 2 wickets to go, Braun pushed hard for his century, reaching it with a quick single to Duff, who overcooked the throw, allowing the batsman to bring up the milestone. The innings ended shortly afterwards, with Noble claiming the final 2 wickets. Braun was undefeated on 103, his maiden test century, made in over 3.5 hours with 12 fours. The English had posted a competitive total of 388, whilst Trumbull and Noble both claimed 3 wickets. Darling and Trumper opened the batting for the Australians. Almost immediately, Darling was out, caught in the slips for 1 off Blythe, and was replaced by Hill, who started with boundaries off both Blythe and Barnes. Trumper also started well, taking 7 off 2 balls from Barnes and a cut for 4 off Blythe. The score was moving so quickly that Maclaren went ultra-defensive, stationing 4 men on the leg side boundary off Braun. This had little impact, with the 50 coming up in only 30 minutes of batting. The English issues were compounded when Barnes had to leave the field with a left knee injury, having wrenched it earlier in the innings. This loss was great, especially as Barnes had been the only bowler to pose a threat to the 2 batsmen. Hill took full advantage, racing ahead and bringing up his half-century at a run a minute. Trumper, who was only half Hill's score at this stage, now started to ramp up, taking 11 off a Blythe over before a drive to the long straight boundary brought up his own 50. The score moved into the 130s with both batsmen looking supreme. It would be batsman error that split them, however, with a miscommunication leading Trumper to be stranded, run out for 65. The two had shared a 137-run partnership at better than a run a minute. Duff replaced Trumper and helped see out the day without further loss, ending on 2 for 172, with Hill having moved on to 83. The Australians were still trailing by 216 runs, who were in an otherwise excellent position. Rain had been forecast of each of the first few days, but following the rest day, none had fallen by the resumption of play on day 3. Hill moved cautiously into the 90s, where he was then dropped on 92 by Jones in the outfield off the bowling of Gunn. Having got a life, Hill played more recklessly in pursuit of his century. He struck a drive for 4, but then on 98 went for the big hit off Braund, with Tildesley taking a well-judged catch close to the boundary. Hill had batted for 2.5 hours and making his second consecutive score in the 90s with 11 boundaries. Gregory joined Duff at 3 for 197, and the two moved the score into the 200s. Duff hit a back cut for 4, but was then lucky to survive a drop in the slips by Maclaren. Both batsmen were scoring mainly in boundaries, but there were large scoring gaps in between. Duff, who had made his way to 43 with 8 boundaries, was trapped LBW by Braund. Armstrong replaced him and batted slowly until lunch, with the Australians reaching at 4 for 248, with Gregory having made his way to 30. Following lunch, the score moved on to 260 before Armstrong tamely patted one back to Gunn, giving his first wicket after previously having 2 opportunities dropped. Trumbull joined Gregory, who moved to his 50 with a cut off Gunn, followed by a big hit over long on off Braund. A long period without scoring followed, with Gregory eventually succumbing to the pressure, giving a simple catch to mid-on off Braund to be out for 55. The Australians were now 6 for 288. From here, the Australians were unable to develop any partnerships of significance as Gunn ran through the tail. He took the final 4 wickets to fall, leading to the Australian innings ending on 321, trailing the English score by 67. Gunn was the pick of the bowlers, finishing with 5 for 76. Braund had claimed 3, but had gone for 143 runs in the process. Maclaren and Hayward commenced for the English, looking to build a match-winning lead. Maclaren survived his first ball by a whisker with Howe nearly knocking his stumps out. He handled Noble better, hitting him for a boundary. Given their position, the English didn't need to force the play and batted carefully, although they still scored at a fair rate, bringing up 50 runs at a run a minute. At this point, they started taking more risks, with both batsmen now looking to find the boundary. They took the score on to 80 before Trumbull struck, bowling Maclaren for 44. Tildesley replaced him. Hayward was lucky to survive a stumping opportunity as Kelly fumbled to take. They saw through the rest of the day, ending at 1 for 98, a lead of 165. Light showers fell overnight, but had little impact on the pitch as the 4th day began under bright skies. The English started in a positive mode, taking 11 off Trumbull's first over. Tildesley survived a drop chance in the following over, but Hayward was not so lucky, being bowled for 47 by Trumbull. He was replaced by Quaife, who again batted slowly. Tildesley would be dismissed soon after, ran out from a smart bit of fielding from Trumper for 25. Jessup came to the crease at 4 for 144 and struck Noble for 2 fours and a 6 in an over, before being bowled going for another big stroke off Trumbull. Howe replaced Noble and was struck for 3 fours by new batsman Braund before getting his revenge on the stroke of lunch, bowling him for 17. The English went to lunch on 5 for 165, with Quaife not out on 10 after 70 minutes of batting. Following the break, the wind picked up drastically. This made conditions more difficult for the fielding side. Quaife doubled his total in short time, whilst new batsman Lilly batted enterprisingly. The two took the score past 200 before a violent storm struck the ground, ending the play for the day. The English now led by 269, but only had 4 wickets remaining, with Barnes being unable to bat due to his injury. The 5th day dawned with the play starting on time following the storm that ended day 4. The Australians started well, with McLeod clean bowling Lilly without addition to his overnight score of 21. The English innings couldn't get going after this, losing wickets at regular intervals to be ending on 247, with Quaife last out for 44. Trumbull claimed the final 3 wickets to finish with 6 for 74 and 9 for the match. This gave the Australians a challenging total of 313 to win and take a 2-1 lead in the series. The Australians opened with Trumper and Duff, the first time this soon-to-be-famous combination would join forces. It was an inauspicious start, however, as Duff, having struck Gunn for a boundary, trod on his wicket. This brought Hill and Trumper together again. The English, already missing the bowling of Barnes, also suffered from limited effectiveness from Blythe, who was struggling with torn ligaments in his spinning finger. Trumper and Hill picked up from where they left off in the first innings, hitting hard strokes all around the wicket. 50 was raised without much difficulty. However, at this score, Trumper was surprised by a ball from Gunn and was bowled. His place was taken by Gregory. Hill now started to play out of his crease, trying to smother the turn created by Gunn and Braund on the now wearing wicket. This was a successful approach and helped take his score on with little difficulty. Gregory played his trademark cut shots and also looked comfortable before seemingly hitting a ball to slip when Maclaren completed the catch, throwing the ball in the air. However, Gregory stood his ground and was given not out by the umpire. This didn't cost the English, however, as Gregory was out 2 runs later in the next over, caught off gun for 23. Darling joined Hill and the two went to tea with a score at 3 for 103, with Hill not out 48. Following the break, Darling played second fiddle to Hill, who did the bulk of the scoring. He took advantage of the wavering English attack, whose depth was now being sorely tested. Hill quickly moved past 50 and with little difficulty progressed the total. Maclaren now turned to his part-timer in Hayward, but this only led to an increase in the scoring. Hill took full advantage, once again moving into the 90s as stumps approached. At this point, Jessup was tried. Hill, who had moved to 97, was struck on the pads. The appeal was unsuccessful, but next ball crashed down the stumps. This was Hill's third consecutive 90 in the series. He had, however, taking the Australians to 194. Darling, who had made his way to 40 after having started slowly, and Trumbull saw out the rest of the day's play, ending at 4 for 201, still requiring 112 runs for victory. The sixth day dawned brightly with the Australians starting in a similar fashion, with Darling driving Jessup for 4. The scoring was otherwise slow, with only 11 coming in the first half hour. Darling brought up his 50 and was soon afterwards dropped by Blythe off his own bowling. At the other end, Trumbull struck gun for a boundary, taking the score past 230. The total continued to climb, moving to 250 just before lunch. Jessup was brought back, with Darling striking him for 4, before falling 2 balls later for 69. The Australians went to lunch still requiring 58 runs, with 5 wickets in hand. Noble came to the crease to join Trumbull, who was on 29, following the break. There was some tension still in the game, but Noble began well, finding the boundary in his first over. Trumbull was also batting with confidence and moved into the 40s. With the score reaching 287, Noble was run out trying to take a suicidal single. He was replaced by Armstrong. With only 26 runs to get, Trumbull decided to get them quickly, bringing up his 50 with a boundary to square leg. Another boundary off Jessup took the runs required to single figures. Maclaren dropped a chance off Armstrong at this point, whilst the victory was achieved through keeper error, with 3 byes giving the Australians the win by 4 wickets. Trumbull ended on 62 not out with 8 boundaries. The Australians had taken a 2-1 lead and looked well set to retain the Ashes for a third successive series. An assessment of Barnes' knee showed that the damage was serious enough to end his tour. His performances, particularly in the second test, had justified Maclaren's selection, and without him the English would struggle to penetrate the Australian lineups. This test also marked the last of Joe Darling in the series, with the requirements of managing his farm preventing him from participating in the final 2 tests. The English played their second match against New South Wales between the third and fourth tests, gaining some confidence through an innings and 137-run victory, with Maclaren, Hayward and Tildesley all scoring big hundreds. Both sides were forced into changes for the fourth test in Sydney. The English brought in more batting power, replacing the injured Barnes with the debutant McGahey. The Australians also made changes. Darling was replaced by New South Wales all-rounder Albert Hopkins, who was selected ahead of Sid Gregory's brother Charles and Charles Eadie from Tasmania. McLeod was also left out, with the left-arm spin of Victorian Jack Saunders, who had taken 11 wickets against New South Wales the previous month, being preferred. With the Australians also in need of a new captain, Trumbull was elected, being the most experienced player in the side, having made his debut in 1890. Maclaren was once again successful at the toss and chose to bat on a pitch which appeared to hold few demons. Fred Spofforth, who had been living in England for the past 11 years, had arrived in time to witness the first day's play. Once again, Maclaren and Hayward opened for the English, whilst Noble and debutant Saunders commenced for the Australians. Both bowlers started well, restricting the batsman, with Saunders giving Hayward great difficulty. Eventually, the bowler erred in length, allowing Hayward to strike 2 consecutive leg side boundaries. The first hour brought 45 runs, with Maclaren surviving a miscued shot shortly after. The two continued through to lunch, with the score reaching 68, with both batsmen in the 30s. Following lunch, Saunders claimed his first test wicket, bowling Hayward for 41 with the score at 73. This brought Tildesley in to join Maclaren. Tildesley started quickly, with 3 boundaries in the first 2 overs he faced. However, the bowling tightened at this point, with the total crawling along towards 100. When this milestone was reached, Maclaren now started to free his arms, taking advantage of any loose deliveries. He moved past 50 and was continuing his love affair with the SCG. Trumbull at one end was keeping it tight, but he was struggling to find a supporting partner, with Noble, Howe and Saunders all going for easy runs. Maclaren struck Noble for 3 consecutive boundaries, taking his score on to 79. The two batsmen will bring up their 100-run stand just as tea was taken, with Maclaren on 90 and Tildesley having made 41. Following the break, Saunders was brought on for immediate results, having Maclaren caught at mid-off by Duff for 92. He was out with the score on 179, and his dismissal led to a collapse. Quaife was dismissed for 4, caught behind off Saunders, whilst Jessup skewed a big shot first ball to Noble at point from the same bowler, out for a golden duck. The English were now 4 for 188 and squandering their strong start. Braun joined Tildesley and the two took the score past 200, with Tildesley hitting a 6 off Saunders over the sight screen. However, at 221, Braun was trapped LBW by Trumbull. He was replaced by debutant McGahey. Tildesley, who had managed to make it into the 70s, was out off the bowling of Noble shortly before the close of play, caught behind for 79 after almost 3 hours at the crease, giving Noble his 50th wicket in tests. Lilly and McGahey saw out the day, but the English position of 6 for 266 was not as good as it could have been considering where they were at tea. A record 40,000 strong crowd attended the second day of the test, a Saturday. Trumbull gave them plenty to cheer for early by bowling McGahey in his second over of the day without him adding to his overnight score of 18. Jones replaced him, joining Lilly, who was in an adventurous mood. The English keeper repeatedly lofted Trumbull and Saunders to the boundary, just out of reach of the fielders. Jones, after starting slowly, also managed to find the boundary off Trumbull. The score raced past 300 and the partnership went to 49 before Saunders was switched for Noble. This immediately brought about the breakthrough, as Lilly was caught behind for 40. The end of the innings came quickly, with Trumbull claiming Jones without a run being added before Noble took the final wicket with the score at 317. Saunders was the pick of the bowlers, having taken 4 wickets on debut, whilst Noble and Trumbull both claimed 3 apiece. The total was considered a middling one, and would require some excellent bowling from the English to be competitive. In the short time before lunch they started well, with Jessup claiming Trumbull for 6. Trumper fell on the other side of the break, with Jessup having him well caught in slips by Braun. This saw the Australians drop to 2 for 18, which soon became 3 for 30, with Jessup again proving irresistible, this time dismissing Gregory, with Maclaren parrying the ball to Braun, who completed the catch. Noble then joined Hill, and they just made his way to double figures. Hill attempted to hit out against Jessup, top-edging one safely before another skied shot was caught at mid-on. The Australians were now in a precarious position of 4 for 48, with Jessup's pace causing havoc, having taken all 4 wickets to fall. At this point, Duff combined with Noble. They benefited with the removal of Jessup from the attack, with Maclaren looking to rest his key bowler. Despite this, both batted cautiously, looking to build a partnership. The arrival of Blythe to the bowling crease saw the Australians become more adventurous, with Duff cutting him for 4. However, Noble should have been dismissed as he came down to pitch and Blythe and missed, only for Lilly to muff the stumping. Jessup was brought back, but was not as effective, with the batsman taking 11 off 1 over. This led to the 100 being raised. The partnership moved to 71 before it was broken, with Duff feathering a ball from Blythe to the keeper to be dismissed for 39. He was replaced by Armstrong. Noble managed to reach his 50 before the close of play, whilst Armstrong also started to look comfortable, moving to 11 before rain brought an early end to proceedings. The Australians were on 5 for 148, still trailing by 169. Following the rest day, play resumed for day 3, with a Monday record of 18,000 in attendance. Noble started well with a 4 driven off Jessup, but fell soon after, trapped LBW at Braun for 56, although Noble believed he got back to the delivery. He was replaced by the debutant Hopkins with a score at 160. The Australians batted slowly, scoring only 2 runs off the 10 overs post Noble's dismissal. The shackles were broken when Hopkins hit a full toss to the fine leg boundary before Armstrong delighted the crowd with some big hitting, including a ball that was caught by Tildesley, but the catch was only completed outside the playing boundary, giving Armstrong a 6. Armstrong brought up his half-century with another boundary and took the score past 200 before he was bowled by Braun for 55. Kelly joined Hopkins with lunch taken shortly afterwards. After lunch, Hopkins brought up double figures with a single, having spent over an hour at the crease to this point. The score moved slowly in singles before Hopkins found his rhythm, hitting consecutive boundaries off gun. Some more big hits from both batsmen took the score past 250 before Hopkins was dismissed for 43, caught behind off Braun. This brought Howell to the crease, who would play an extraordinary cameo. He sent his second ball over the rope for 6, taking 18 runs off the next over, before hitting Jessup for 2 boundaries. He was out shortly after for 35, having only faced 15 balls, almost half of which went to the boundary. The innings closed shortly after when Saunders was out for a duck, with Kelly left not out 24. Braun claimed the final wicket to join Jessup on 4 for the innings. The Australians finished on 299, giving the English a slender lead of 18 runs. The pitch was still in excellent condition at the beginning of the English second innings, with Maclaren and Hayward once again opening. However, they could not take advantage of the conditions, with Maclaren falling caught behind off Noble for only 5. Tildesley came in at number 3 and took the score on to 24 before he edged the ball from Saunders to Trumbull at slip. New batsman Quaife joined Hayward, and the two struggled to score off the 2 bowlers. Most runs came from miscues or edges as the pressure built. Eventually, Noble drew Hayward forward to a wide ball outside off, only for the ball to spin between bat and pad to bowl him for 12. Jessup started in his usual style, with a cut shot for 4 off Noble, followed by a full toss from Saunders dispatched to the boundary. This didn't last long though, as Saunders spun one past his edge to bowl him. This left the English at 4 for 57. Noble dismissed Quaife in the next over, trapping LBW, whilst Braun fell for a duck to Saunders. Lilly then became Noble's 4th victim when he 2-edged a ball to slip. The English had lost 4 wickets for 3 runs, now at a precarious 7 for 60. McGahey and Jones managed to see out the rest of the day without further incident, but the hopes of setting a difficult total were now shattered at 7 for 77. Any chance for a recovery early on day 4 were dashed when McGahey was caught behind off Saunders with only 1 run added. The final 2 wickets took the score on to 99 before the innings was ended. Both Noble and Saunders, who had bowled unchanged throughout the innings, claimed one of these apiece to both complete 5-wicket hauls. This left the Australians with a target of 118 to win. The Australians opened with Duff and Trumper. Trumper started with 3 boundaries and an over off Blythe, but he was dropped at mid-on in the same over. Duff joined in the fun with a square cut followed by a pull to the boundary. The 50 partnership came up in only 35 minutes of play, but here Trumper was dismissed, trapped LBW by Blythe. Hill replaced him and started with the drive for 4. He should have been dismissed shortly after, but was dropped by Lilly. The Australians went to lunch at 1 for 62, with Duff having moved to 30. Following lunch, Duff started with a cut for 4, whilst Hill successfully bisected the 3 men on the straight boundary on multiple occasions. The score moved quickly past 100 and within 20 runs of victory when Hill was caught behind off gun for 30. The crowd called for Howe, his exploits in the previous innings fresh in everyone's minds, to come in next to finish the job. Trumbull acquiesced to the crowd's demands, but they were disappointed, as Howe was caught at point first ball for a duck. Gregory came in next, and with Duff took the Australians to the victory target with little fuss. Duff brought up his 50, whilst Gregory finished the match with a pull shot for 4, giving the Australians a 7-wicket victory and confirming their series win, going up 3-1 with only 1 test left to play in Melbourne at the end of February. The English had some consolation with a victory over Victoria by 8 wickets, with Maclaren scoring a century. They were going to the final test making 0 changes to their 4th test lineup. Meanwhile, the Australians made 2 changes. Saunders had suffered an injury playing for Victoria against the English and was unavailable, whilst Howe was dropped. They were replaced by Tasmanian Charles Eadie, playing his 2nd test, and Joe Travers, a slow left-armer from South Australia who was making his debut. The pitch was a difficult one to read, and when Trumbull won the toss, he reluctantly chose to bat. Trumper and Duff continued their partnership from the previous match. The first over, bowled by Jessup, saw Trumper take 3 off the first ball before Duff took 10 runs off the next 3 balls, including 2 boundaries. However, Duff didn't progress beyond this, being bowled by Braun in the next over. Hill came in at number 3 and faced up to Blythe, who replaced Jessup. Trumper took 2 boundaries off Blythe's first over, whilst Hill also found the square leg boundary off Braun. Despite this scoring, the nature of the pitch meant the batsmen were never comfortable. The 50 came up in only 33 minutes with a straight drive for 4 from Hill, but he lost Trumper soon after for 27, bowled by Blythe. Gregory came to the crease at 2 for 54 and set to play cautiously. The 2 progressed the score into the 80s, helped by numerous poor fielding efforts, before Maclaren had a double bowling change, bringing on Gunn and Hayward. This brought about the breakthrough, with Gunn having Hill caught at 3rd man for 28. Noble joined Gregory, and the 2 saw through to lunch with the score at 3 for 98. Immediately following the break, Gregory was dismissed for 25 in the exact fashion that Hill had been. From here, Ball completely dominated the bat. Noble brought up the 100 with the boundary through slips, but he was then trapped LBW by Hayward. Hayward then dismissed Trumbull, who skied an aggressive shot to be caught at Sean's flight and leg. Whilst Armstrong, who had come at the fall of Noble, held firm at one end, consistent wickets kept falling at the other, with the Australians losing 6 for 26 after lunch to collapse to 9 for 124. Last man Travers added 9 in a partnership of 20 with Armstrong, but when he became Gunn's 4th victim for the innings, the Australians were dismissed for 144. Armstrong remained 17 not out, whilst Hayward also claimed 4 wickets. Maclaren then tried to press his advantage, changing his batting order and opening with himself and the big hitting Jessup. This bore fruit immediately, with Jessup striking the first 4 balls of the innings to the boundary off Noble. He followed this up in the next over by launching Trumbull into the crowd. Another boundary off Trumbull soon after saw him bring up 30 in only 20 minutes of batting. Maclaren also found the boundary, and the score had raced to 50 before Jessup tried one too many shots, being well caught by Hopkins looking into the sun off Trumbull. Jessup's 35 had given England the impetus in chasing down the small Australian score. His replacement was his temperamental opposite in Quaife, who could only manage 3 before edging Noble to slip. This was then followed by Trumbull getting his opposite number Maclaren caught and bowled for 25. The English were now 3 for 64 and in danger of squandering their good start. Hayward and Tilsley then combined for a while, seeing off the opening bowlers and moving the score into the 90s. This saw the two men brought into the Australian side, Travers and Eadie, have their turn at the bowling crease. Hayward attempted to hit Travers out of the attack, but only succeeded in skying a ball high into the outfield, where Trumper took a smart catch. Tildesley followed shortly after, edging a ball behind off Eadie. The English were now 5 for 96 and in danger of not passing the Australian score. However, Braun and Lilly came together and held out until the end of the day, taking the English to 133, within 11 of the Australians' first innings total. The English started the day well, taking 7 off Eadie's first over, whilst in the next off Noble they went past the Australians. Lilly was the more aggressive of the pair, jumping out to hit Trumbull to the boundary before taking 10 off one Noble over. Braun attempted to match his partner, but could only miss hit a cut shot off Trumbull to be caught, dismissed for 30. McGahey was then bowled in Trumbull's next over for a duck, whilst Lilly departed for 41 soon after, hitting Trumbull high into the offside to be well caught by Eadie. This gave the Australian captain his 5th for the innings. The remaining 2 wickets went to Eadie, closing the English innings on 189, a lead of 45 runs. The Australian openers, Trumper and Duff, negotiated the 10 minutes before lunch without loss. Following the break, Trumper benefited from 4 overthrows before smashing Hayward to the leg boundary. He tried one too many big shots, however, and skied to mid-on off Braun to be dismissed for 18. Hill came to the crease and was lucky to survive a strong LBW shout when on 4. At the other end, Duff was finding the boundary, with a back cut off Braun, followed by 2 to square leg off Hayward. This helped erase the deficit, but Duff would be out soon after, caught and bowled by Braun for 28. Gregory joined Hill with a score at 2 for 52, a lead of 7. He started well, with a boundary to fine leg. At the other end, Hill had struggled, reaching double figures in over 30 minutes of batting. Here, though, he started to find his rhythm, straight driving Braun to the boundary. This broke the shackles, with Hill then taking Braun for 15 in his next over, with 3 consecutive boundaries. Blythe replaced Braun, but received similar treatment, the Australian 100 coming up in his first over. The batsman continued to score freely, heading to tea at 128, with Hill on 43 and Gregory on 39. After tea, the bowling was a lot tighter. This eventually got to Gregory, who was bowled by Gunn for 41, having shared a 79-run partnership with Hill. Noble came in at number 5. The match stopped briefly as a fight in the crowd took attention away, but upon resumption Noble was busy, compiling 16 at better than a run a minute. He back-cut Gunn to the boundary, but was out next ball trying to repeat the stroke. Armstrong replaced him and was at the other end as Hill brought up his 50, his 4th of the series. He moved to 55 and should have been out, but once again in the series, Lilly missed a simple stumping. Hill continued to move his score onwards, being most effective in front of the wicket as opposed to his usual style, which focused more behind the crease. At the other end, Armstrong struggled to get going. Eventually he struck a boundary with an off-drive off Blythe, which brought up the 200. Here, Hill fell once again short of a century, this time for 87, being caught behind off Hayward. Trumbull joined Armstrong at 5 for 208, and the two looked to make it through to stumps. Armstrong will fall just before, though, trapped LBW by Braun for 20. Kelly replaced him, and with Trumbull, the two saw through to the end of the day, with Australians on 6 for 226, a lead of 181. Rain had fallen during the rest day, meaning the pitch was becoming more dangerous. Day 3 started with a shout for LBW on Trumbull, which was unsuccessful. The Australian captain took advantage, striking a 4 and then 3 in the next 2 balls. Kelly also played an expansive hook shot that was just cut off before the boundary. The two took the score on to 249 before Blythe got one past Trumbull's bat to bowling for 20. From here, the Australian innings collapsed, with the final 3 wickets falling for only 6 runs. Braun claimed the last 2 to finish with 5 for 95, his second 5-wicket bag of the series. The Australians finished on 255, setting the English a target of 211 to win a consolation victory. Maclaren reverted back to his usual openers, with himself and Hayward commencing. The first ball highlighted the challenge of the pitch, with Trumbull's off-break rising from a length to strike Maclaren on the ribs. Maclaren handled it well, playing exclusively off the back foot and scoring runs by turning the off-breaks of Trumbull and Noble into the leg side. At the other end, Hayward found scoring more difficult, going to lunch only on a single. Following lunch, rain began to fall as play continued. The English were able to progress their score to 40 before Hayward became the first wicket to fall, caught at mid-on off Trumbull for 15. To add insult to injury, the rain increased, leading the players to leave the field immediately. After a delay of 35 minutes, play resumed, with Quaife joining Maclaren. The two moved the score on to 60 before another rain delay sent the players from the field, this time for an hour. Maclaren started well after the resumption, moving into the 40s. Quaife was then trapped LBW for 4 by Noble, with a score at 2 for 64. He was replaced by Jessup, who cut his first ball for 4 and then took the next ball to long on for 3. Maclaren was lucky to survive a stumping chance, only just regaining his ground. At 48, he hit a ball into the field, completing the first run and turning for a second to complete his 50. However, Jessup refused to leave his crease, leading the English captain to be stranded short of his ground by a good throw from Hill. This was the second unfortunately timed dismissal of the innings, with play ending only a few balls after, with the English at 3 for 87, still requiring 124 for victory. Day 4 couldn't have started any worse for the English, with Jessup playing a big shot off the first ball, only to be caught at mid-on off Trumbull. Braun joined Tildesley, but the pitch was extremely difficult, with both batsmen being struck by balls that reared off the pitch. Braun attempted to hit his way out of trouble, but could only find Hill in the outfield off the bowling of Noble. Lilly helped take the score past 100, but became Noble's third victim when he was caught by Duff at mid-off. Mackay survived when Trumbull dropped him at slip, and took advantage by finding the boundary soon after. Tildesley also found the boundary, but when the score reached 120, Mackay was caught in the outfield, another victim of Noble. The English had lost 4 for 33, and still required 91 for victory, with only 3 wickets in hand. At this point, Jones combined with Tildesley. The two flirted with danger, hitting numerous shots just out of the reach of fielders. This brought about the first bowling change of the innings, with Eadie replacing Trumbull. Tildesley hit his first ball for 4, and after 13 runs in 2 overs, Trumbull returned to the bowling crease. The score went past 150 as Jones again survived a lucky chance as a nick went between keeper Kelly and Trumbull at slip. In the next over from Noble, a stumping chance was missed. However, this was where Jones's luck finally ran out, as he drove one hard back to the bowler, who took a good catch. Jones had made 28 in 25 minutes and taken the score to 157. With only 2 wickets remaining, the English still needed 54 runs. Gunn could only manage 4 before becoming Noble's 6th victim. The final partnership took the English to within 33 runs of victory before Tildesley, who had been in since the fall of the 3rd wicket, was last out for 36, with Captain Trumbull finally taking the last wicket. The English had finished on 178, giving them their 4th defeat in tests on the tour, with the scoreline 4-1 Australia being a repeat of the previous English tour and being Australia's 3rd successive series victory, the first time they had won that many in a row. The result was the one expected before the series, as the English had been given little chance. However, under Maclaren they performed well, surprisingly winning the first test match and leading on the first innings in each of the final 3 test matches. They were unfortunate that their most incisive bowler, Barnes, had broke down halfway through the series, having taken 19 wickets at 17 across 2.5 matches. Braun was the leading wicket taker for the English with 21 and was well supported by Blythe and Gunn. However, their lack of batting depth cost them. Maclaren was the standout with 412 runs at 45, whilst Braun and Hayward averaged in the mid-30s, but after that it was very hit and miss. This contrasted with the Australians, who were led by Hill with 521 runs at 52, including 3 consecutive scores in the 90s, whilst Newman, Armstrong and Duff both averaged over 44. On the bowling side, Noble and Trumbull were dominant, taking 60 wickets between them, with Noble's 32 including 4 fifers and a 10-wicket match. In the end, it was the Australians' ability in the crucial moments of matches that got them over the line. After the 5th test, Charles Eadie returned home to play in the South Tasmanian Cricket Association Championship final for Breaker Day against Wellington. The match was only played on Saturdays, but will be played to completion. Ken Byrne, the first Tasmanian test player, scored 161 in the Wellington innings. Eadie was then in for the next 4 Saturdays, compiling 566 runs, the highest score ever achieved in club cricket around the world to that time. Naturally, Breaker Day won the final. The English had one final first-class match against South Australia, which they won by 6 wickets. This season was also notable for an Australian first. In a first-class match between New South Wales and Queensland, both sides featured an Indigenous Australian, Jack Marsh for New South Wales and Alec Henry for Queensland. Both had suffered from accusations of throwing, which were generally put down to racist attitudes against Indigenous players. In fact, despite Marsh's excellent first-class record, Monty Noble would use his power as a selector to prevent him from being picked in future for both New South Wales and Australia. New South Wales were the Shield winners, having won all 4 of their matches. The 1901-02 tour had again shown the strength of Australian cricket and was well received off the back of Federation, with the side for the first time representing a united Australian nation. Immediately following the end of the series, the Australians would head to England for the 1902 tour, a series which would go down in folklore for some of the closest test matches in history, and from the exploits of one Victor Trumper, who would forever etch his name as one of the greatest batsmen of all time. Thank you for listening. New episodes of Endless Summons will be released fortnightly. Please subscribe to be notified of new releases. You can also follow us on Twitter at pod_endless, and you can email us at endlesssummerpod@gmail.com.